morning. Welcome to the garden. I'm so glad you've elected to be here with us on this gorgeous day, although it's a little chillier than I thought. I went outside after first service and thought that was not a good idea. So, at any rate, I'm glad you're here. I suspect most of us are familiar with the name of Helen Keller, and we know a little bit about her story. She's the woman who lost her sight and her hearing when she was 19 months old. And then thanks to her teacher and companion, Anne Sullivan, she was able to achieve remarkable things in the course of her life. She wrote 12 books and numerous articles, and she became a passionate advocate for persons with disabilities and other causes that she cared a lot about. And it's interesting what she learned. She was able to function as fully as she did in this world, probably better than most of us function, because she developed as acutely as possible all of her senses. It's said that she could hear what people were saying because she used her hands to feel their lips while they were speaking, and she could tell what they were saying to her. She could read sign language, again, using her hands to feel the signs that people were making and understand it. And thanks to a quartet, she learned to appreciate and value music. She would sit at a table with a resonant tabletop, and the quartet would be playing nearby, and she could feel the music and get the whole sense of the music. She could really, really appreciate it in that way. Well, I think that's probably as close as we would come to having a way to identify with the Bible passage that we have for this morning. This story is out of Mark's Gospel, and interestingly enough, Mark is the only one who tells it. Now, Matthew and Luke both use Mark as a source, but they don't tell this story. They've left it out in their writings. Well, let's look at it. They came to Bethsaida, where some people brought a blind man to Jesus and begged him to touch him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. After spitting on the man's eyes, Jesus placed his hands on him and asked him, "Can you see anything?" The man looked up and said, "Yes, I can see people, but they look like trees walking around." Jesus again placed his hands on the man's eyes. This time the man looked intently. His eyesight returned, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus then sent him home with the order, "Don't go back into the village." Now, there are lots of things we could talk about in that particular passage, but I want us to think about the two key ways that people generally understand this story. One is to see it as a miracle story, that the man's sight literally was restored, and that was one of the miracles Jesus performed, and that's certainly one way we can understand it. That's not my preferred way. I'm certainly not the one to ever discount miracles or the possibility of miracles. But yet I think there's another meaning that resonates more with me. And that's this whole idea about seeing. There really are a couple different ways when we talk about seeing something. We can see literally, physically, with our eyes. Or we can see in the way of really getting it, of understanding what's going on, or what's referred to as perception. Seeing is not perceiving. They're not equal to one another. And I think it's kind of interesting to note. I think for me, that's the sense that I prefer in this particular passage, partially because of its placement in Mark's Gospel. And I've taught the Gospel of Mark several different times, and the thing that's interesting that it repeats itself again and again and again is the frustration Jesus has with his disciples. Here they are with him day after day after day. They see what he's doing, they hear what he's saying, and they're obtuse. They just simply don't get it. And he's constantly saying to them, "You have ears and do not hear. You have eyes and do not see," which is his way of trying to say to them, you're not understanding what's going on. You're not getting the depth of the story. You're really not getting it at all. Well, that applies, I think, to many of us sometimes, because I wonder how many of us really see and really get it and really understand what life and faith and the world are all about. If you're anything like me, I probably am oblivious way too much of the time. I'm not very good at taking in all the details of things that you can see that go on around us. And many of us have that sixth sense, that intuition, that gut feeling that we can kind of begin to sense what's happening, but we don't really take in as much necessarily with our senses. And I know we're all different on that. Some are probably better than others, but my hunch is we all could benefit by trying to improve our senses, all of our senses, and use them more fully. That, to a point at least, is part of what I think Barbara Brown Taylor is trying to learn for herself and to help us experience and learn in her book, Learning to Walk in the Dark. I know I've mentioned it before. Last week we referred to it, and I'm not going to keep beating it up, but it's really a good book. There's lots of food for thought in it, lots of tidbits of information. So if you have the time and have the interest, I encourage you to pick it up and read it. But she does, I think, in the course of her experiences and her reading and her storytelling, really point out how important it is for us to develop all of our senses as fully as we possibly can, to really experience all of life that there is for us to experience. One of the stories she tells is about learning about a blind French resistance fighter whose name was Jacques Lucien. Now, this is someone who could not see at all. And in his era, when he was alive, it was the kind of thing that he would be sent away by his family, or certainly pitied by society. Well, that isn't what happened with him. His father, his parents wouldn't send him away. And in fact, his father said to him, go on an adventure in life. And when you see, or when you learn something new and different, share it with us. Tell us what you've learned. In that way, they kind of turned him into an explorer when it came to finding that which was new and different around him, and really becoming revelatory in what he was able to see and understand. He wrote about all this in a memoir that was entitled "And There Was Light." Now, he used to confound his friends because he would describe things to them that they knew he was not able to see, and yet he could describe them perfectly. And it said that he was able to tell what kind of tree it was by the sound of the shadow of the tree. Absolutely remarkable. But he said that every tree had its own sound to it. It was just a matter of really listening to it and hearing that and understanding what it was. There's something else she talks about too, but she really points out that the problem most of us have is that we don't really use all of our senses. We rely on sight. And it's limited in what we see because we glance ever so quickly. And we rely, therefore, on outer appearances. And we don't really go more deeply into it. She wrote this: it, meaning sight, attends to the surface of things, which makes it an essentially superficial sense. We let our eyes skid over trees, furniture, traffic, faces, too often mistaking sight for perception. Well, then she has a suggestion or something we might try using some of our other senses. She would suggest that we sit down at a table, and that we close our eyes and start to rub our hand over that table. She said what we might feel is a gouge here or there, where maybe someone dropped some silverware, or maybe a dish was dropped on it, creating a little depression, a little chunk in it. She said we might be able to feel where the planks of the table come together there. And before we ever touch it, we might in fact smell the candle wax that has dripped onto the tabletop. And she says that by the time we get to the leg of the table, we know far more about it than we would ever know with just a quick glance at it, which is what most of us would typically do. She shares some other experiences, both some of her personal experiences and some that she knows about and has heard about from others. One of them is how people enhance their sense of taste. There is in Zurich, Switzerland, a restaurant that was opened in the late 1990s, owned by 4 blind entrepreneurs. And as of the writing of this book, which was within the last year, diners had to make reservations months in advance in order to get in so they could eat in the dark. And they literally would do that. Now, these 4 owners of this particular business said they got the idea from a Swiss pastor who would always blindfold his dinner guests when they came to his home. because he said that when they weren't looking and weren't relying on their sight, they got more of the taste of the food and were able to absorb the flavors and all of the aromas that would come with the food. He also said he thought people listened to one another better. Well, this whole idea of eating in the dark has apparently caught on in some places, because there are other such restaurants in Paris and Montreal and Tel Aviv, and there's an opaque, what's called an opaque group of restaurants here in the U.S. where this is happening. And in those settings, when people arrive, they check and lock away all of their valuables, and anything that had light at all, a watch, a phone, all of that goes away. And then they place their order from a fixed price menu before they're led into the dark, into the dining room. And they say when they get in there, it sounds like any other restaurant that you would go in. You hear the sound of people talking and occasionally laughter as they hear silverware being dropped on the floor or whatever. You're led to your table, and then as you sit down, you're instructed on, for example, when the entree is served, you're instructed as to what's where on your plate and how you find it, how you might pass from one to the other, how that needs to be done, how you put your finger down in a water glass or a wine glass so that you make sure it isn't overflowing when you pour something into it, and just generally how you operate totally in the dark. You're also warned to always wear dark clothes, black clothes, if you're going to be going out afterward, because inevitably you're going to spill food all over you. I kind of like that idea anyway, because, you know, at my age at this point, you tend to spill a little dribble a little bit here and there. So, but that would be it's kind of a neat idea. There's something that Barbara Brown Taylor does that I don't think I really want to do, but it yet was yielded an interesting experience. In her trying to learn to walk in the dark, she goes with a couple very experienced people into the innermost part of a cave, a part of the cave where most other people never go. And when they get to the place that's the innermost part there, they stop and they all turn out their lights and they sit in the silence. And she said at first all she heard was silence. In the darkness there was nothing but silence. And then she heard this sound. It was like a high whining sound. And she said it was like electric wires, but they were miles away from civilization, so there was no way that's what it could be. And later she found out that what she was hearing was her nervous system, that's the sound our nervous system makes when we can hear it. And what she was actually doing was listening to her life, to the life in her body. It was a remarkable experience. Well, there are many other kinds of things like that she tells about in her book, but the point is, it would probably be important for all of us to think about how we might sharpen all of our senses and really experience all of life that there is to experience as fully as we possibly could. That is a matter of actually seeing in a way that we've never seen before, and really listening for things that we've never ever heard before. It's feeling the surfaces and faces in a way we've never felt before. It's engaging all our senses as fully as possible so that we're engaging all of life. Now, some of you I know have been with me on some of our Ireland-Scotland trips, and I'm going to do one more yet in the spring of 2015 in June then. So if you're interested, I hope you'll join us. But part of what we talk about there and why we go there is because of Celtic spirituality. Because in Celtic thought, there was that understanding that God was in the face of every person we met, that God was in every part of nature, in all parts of the world around us. It's just a matter of our looking for that, paying attention, and really seeing it. And so when we begin each morning, it's my aim to just try to encourage us to really pay attention and to really look. And I usually close the morning devotion with, be still and be aware. And sometimes when we're in a new place, in a different place, we really can see in a way we've not seen before, and hear and really experience all that's there in a brand new way. Well, I think that's the challenge for most of us. It's not necessarily being in a new place, it's seeing in a new way, even in our mundane, ordinary, routine days. It's a matter of experiencing them with all of our senses as fully as we possibly can. It's seeing, withholding judgment, making sure we don't judge. It's actually setting aside our preconceived notions and just accepting and really taking in what is instead of putting our layers on top of it. So, what I'd like to do is suggest that we engage in an experiment of trying to really heighten all of our senses. And I want us to do it with a pretty ordinary, mundane thing that we all do every single day, at least once, if not more, a day, and that's in brushing our teeth. The next time we brush our teeth, I would like to suggest that we try closing our eyes. Maybe we already do, but close our eyes and then really make ourselves taste the toothpaste. What flavor is it? Does it have any particular thing to the texture? To really try to taste what it is. And then to feel the bristles of the brush on our teeth and on our gums. And then to really feel and then to smell the freshness of our breath, of the fresh water with which we swish around in our mouth. And to really experience that whole thing. Now, I know you may think that's a pretty silly thing. That's just an ordinary kind of thing. Well, our days are filled with ordinary kinds of things that we miss. We miss a lot of it. And just think how much it would sharpen our whole appreciation and understanding of life if we really, really tried to take it all in its fullest. We would really engage all our senses. I'm convinced that if we can do that, we will really appreciate life and see life in a whole new way. That if we're willing, we can really engage our senses and understand in a new way. And we will know about the incredible richness of our own lives, about the life around us, and of the world in which we live.